Hello everyone, and welcome to Books in the World. I am Madeline Mealy-Holt, your host for today, and I'm so happy to be here representing the Cape Cod Writers Center, where I am the vice president, and my guest today is Robert Reece, Dr. Robert M. Reece, who is the secretary of the Cape Cod Writers Center. As many people have heard, and some of you know, Books in the World has been recording continuously for over 40 years. And we have a wonderful backlog of Cape authors, regional authors who have come here and enjoyed talking about their books. The purpose of Books in the World, which was founded by Marion Volumir, is to showcase the work of the writers and the whole publishing community, to talk about what it is that makes the literary scene function on the Cape and in New England. Today, we're going to talk about Robert Reece's, Dr. Reece. I'm going to call you Bob anyway, because
Good.
We are colleagues on Cape Cod Writers Center board. But Bob has written 3 novels, and his latest one is called Strong Medicine. And it is quite a book. There's a lot to talk about here, and I'm really looking forward to sharing this time with you. But before we start, I just want people to know that we call you Dr. Reece for a very good reason. You have a long career combining medical research and advocacy in the field of child abuse, that you have directed children's pediatric programs in major hospitals, Tufts, Boston Medical Center, Boston City Hospital. I love this one. You directed the pediatric emergency room at Boston City Hospital. Now that must have been really, truly horrendous. So,
very, very good experience. And that's actually what brought me closer to child abuse as a specialty in pediatrics, because so many kids came in there. There in children's and Tufts, all of these emergency rooms receive children with various kinds of injuries and sexual abuse. So that's where I started with my career in child abuse pediatrics.
Well, it certainly is a glorious one. I'm going to jump right in and ask you this question. Why did you decide to write novels instead of spending your retirement in some other way?
Well, I've noticed that the cold facts, the newspaper articles, the news reports about these things, such as child abuse and post-traumatic stress disorder, and the pharmaceutical industry, which is the subject of this book, these are all pretty dry and pretty uninteresting, and most people don't really dive in and read them. But a story will get people's interest. And if you can tell a story that incorporates some of the issues that are involved in all of these things, child abuse, post-traumatic stress, pharmaceutical industry, if you can tell a story with good characters, and I hope that's what I've done, I think people will be interested and possibly get engaged in the process that will alleviate some of these things.
That's, I guess when I was describing your books to myself, I kind of called them thriller social consciousness novels.
That's good. I don't think there's a genre that is recognized on the library shelves of that, but that's fine.
I think that talks about it. Before we jump into Strong Medicine, your earlier books are To Tell the Truth and Double Blind, Double Cross, and I think that you might tell us about each one of those, because it leads up to this one as well.
Yes, well, To Tell the Truth was my first effort in writing fiction based on nonfiction. And it was about a trial of a babysitter who had allegedly shaken a baby and it died. And this is a story that is based on many other cases that I have had over the years. And I think it was a story that needed to be told in fictional ways rather than the cold facts of the stories. Then that led into my second novel, which I didn't want to do another child abuse novel, but I thought, well, one of the things that I noticed in my career in child abuse pediatrics was the fact that people were traumatized badly. Parents, the children themselves, of course, and various people in the community were traumatized by this. So I thought, why don't I do something on post-traumatic stress disorder? Because that's a major, major problem in our society. And so I picked a story that was not child abuse, but was about a returning surgical trauma surgeon named Tom Barrett, who went to the Middle East wars and was traumatized by his experiences there. And he entered a clinical trial for post-traumatic stress disorder. That involved it became a mystery and a thriller at that point, because he was traumatized further by that experience. He went on to get a settlement from the pharmaceutical industry that had injured him, a substantial settlement, legal settlement. And he thought, well, what can I do with all this money? And he decided he would start a nonprofit organization which he called Pharma Truth, which is the subject of the Strong Medicine book. And in Pharma Truth, he found a way to shine a light on the pharmaceutical industry's misbehaviors. This doesn't mean all of them were doing bad things, but some of them were. And he was going to expose this through his nonprofit organization.
Well, I wanted to bring up the subject of your quote that you used to introduce your story. However, you've already clued us in on the subject of shining a light on evil, but to summarize, it says, in order to cause a shadow to disappear, you must shine a light on it. You cannot cause a shadow to disappear by trying to fight it, stamp on it, by railing against it, or any other form of emotional or physical resistance. And who is Shakti Gawain?
She's a writer, and I went to her website, and I actually talked with somebody on her website, and I said, can you tell me, I heard this quote somewhere else, probably on the internet, and I asked this person which novel and did she use this quote in, and the woman said, well, I'll have to get back to you on that, and she did, and she said she doesn't know which one it was. And she said, this has been all over the internet, so it sort of had got legs on the internet.
Okay.
And she says she's proud of the quote, but she can't remember where she used it.
Yeah, it's pretty haunting. Evil is like a shadow. It has no real substance of its own. It is simply a lack of light.
That's right.
Yeah, that gives you a lot to think about.
That struck me as a very, very fitting way to describe what Pharma Truth is trying to do in this book.
Okay, Pharma Truth, let's talk about it a little more deeply. Is this an invention of yours, or are there groups like this?
Well, there are groups like this, but there's none that I know of that are named Pharma Truth, and I did research on this so that I didn't steal somebody else's name.
Yeah.
So there's no Pharma Truth that I know of, except in my book. But it goes to the heart of what we're talking about here, and that is telling the truth about the pharmaceutical industry. And the way that Dr. Barrett decided to do this was to have a website that he would invite people who had been deprived of medicine because of cost or access of other reasons, or had problems with their insurance. And these are all very familiar things that are going on in medical practice. He would ask them to send their stories to him via the website, and then he would send advocates out to talk with these people and recruit them to take action about these things.
Mm-hmm. Well, I was going to ask you about writing your hero as well as writing your villain. But I want to share with you some of my own feelings about your hero, especially. He is the returning war veteran with PTSD, and you open the story with his trying to get back into having some kind of an emotional life with a woman, just to give readers an opportunity to know this is a real novel, even though it has a lot of very, very important subjects. but it's got love and romance and drama and heroes and victims and bad guys. So
Right.
definitely. But I was thinking about this today. Tom Barrett, he was somewhat reluctant to start Farm and Truth, if I remember correctly, and he wasn't sure about how to go about it. And I like the way you developed his approach to that. Did you? This goes back to the subject of writing, about developing a character. What's your thoughts about how you led him along, or how he led you?
I think the problem with doctors is that they think they can do everything. You know, anything else they can do with as much skill as they have brought to medicine. But Tom was smarter than that, I think, and so he decided he needed a lot of help. So the nonprofit had to have a board to be a nonprofit, and so he recruited people from a variety of industries, all who had great experience in dealing not only with the pharmaceutical industry, but with other aspects of medical practice. Pharmacologists, for example, and people who had actually been in practice, so that there was a mix of people there whose expertise he could draw on to decide how to go about this whole business. And they were very helpful. In fact, one of them he actually hired as a consultant because he could tell he needed that kind of
help. And how about some of the victims? Give us a couple of anecdotes about people who have been wronged because of pharmaceutical industry.
Well, I think my favorite character of the people who were victimized is Hannah Dorst. Hannah is probably a 60-year-old widow with very bad rheumatoid arthritis, and the medication that she is on is becoming more and more and more expensive, to the point where she really can't afford it anymore. Her insurance is sort of a meager policy, and it doesn't cover nearly as much of this cost as she needs to have. So she's one of the victims. Another victim is a woman who went in for a surgical procedure, got the surgical procedure and went through it fine, but was given a prescription for 100 pills of OxyContin. And 100 pills for this kind of a procedure was really an excessive prescription. But she thought, because she had had 100 pills prescribed, that she was supposed to take all 100 pills over the course of the treatment, which she did. And then when she stopped, she had a terrible withdrawal reaction and had to go into treatment for her, quote, addiction, which she always found very stigmatizing, because she always thought of addiction as something other people did. So those are two of the victims of this.
Let me ask you, did you make up this 100-pill idea, or have they actually prescribed 100 pills to individuals?
The reason I knew about this is because I had a surgical procedure and I was prescribed that amount. Yeah, and it was, it's just ridiculous. I put them into the police barrel at the after I'd taken maybe 5 or 6 of them, because I didn't have enough pain to justify taking them. But I knew that I could get away with not taking them. And a lot of patients are very unaware that when the doctor says you do this, you're supposed to do it.
In fairness to the pharmaceutical industry right now, I've also had procedures where they gave me 10 and would not renew until I showed up in person, even though I couldn't walk at the time. Mm-hmm. So this is a little more recent, perhaps.
It's a balancing act. It's a balancing act, but one of the pharmaceutical industries encouraged doctors to prescribe more and more of these things, because they said they were under prescribing and we were not treating pain in people adequately, so you should prescribe as many as you think are needed. And so that sort of blossomed into this over-prescribing of OxyContin.
Right. So, talking about writing characters, you have written a villain. And I've talked to other authors who have actually enjoyed writing the villain. And tell me a little bit about your process and what you think about your villain.
It's really interesting because one of my favorite readers, a friend of mine of long standing, said that of all the characters, and to tell the truth, she liked a particular one the best, and he was the villain in there. So I think people are drawn toward the villains as much as they are to the heroes. I think that there are a small number of people who would fit the category of a real villain, and this person, Reggie Warner, in my book, is definitely an outlier. He's a true villain. I tried to make him a little bit more understandable to the reader. I didn't want to make him all black. I wanted to make him have some redeeming qualities, and I had a little trouble finding those.
I'm having a little trouble remembering any myself.
Yeah, right. Well, he had a few, but he was an abused kid, and that was. He grew up in a real little small town in Texas and had an abusive father. So that was his excuse for being as what should I say, greedy as he was.
Yeah. So I don't think we should talk about the resolution of this, and even some of the more, I guess, instructive parts of it is the Senate hearings, and I think we should leave it with some of the details, although there is one fascinating part, which is, of course, about the robotic arm situation that Dr. Barrett discovers. And I guess I'd like to talk about this just in case people don't read your book.
Sure,
they should know about this. It's fascinating.
Well, Dr. Barrett in Double Blind, Double Cross is injured and produces a paralysis of his right arm. And so he, as a surgeon, that's a deadly assignment when you can't use your right arm anymore. And he heard on his radio station that he was listening to about robotic surgery. And this is several years ago. Robotic surgery is almost mainstream now. Mm-hmm. But in those days, it was not so mainstream. It was in the early stages of it. So he got in touch with the people running this and asked about whether a one-armed surgeon could operate a robot. And the director of the fellowship program was a little doubtful at first, but then he said, yes, come on in, we'll work it out. And they did work it out in a way through the engineers and the producers of the Da Vinci robotic surgery. They worked it out so that he could operate the left arm of the robot with his foot, which is a little unorthodox, but it can be done. And remember, robotic surgery can be done with the operating surgeon in a different room altogether from the patient.
The patient.
So
that's a little scary.
It is a little scary. But I had to talk to a number of people about this, and one of the surgeons I talked to, he says, I think I'm a better surgeon when I use robotics. Okay. He says I can see it a lot more what I'm doing, and the precision of the robotic arm is even better than my hand. So it's an interesting.
That's great. Well, a bunch of things. I wanted to ask you about the process of getting your book turned into an audio book.
Oh, yes. Well, the reason I even knew about this was because Nancy Rubin Stewart gave a talk at Writers' Night Out a year or so ago about the turning of books into audiobooks. And I thought, well, that sounds like a good idea. I hope it's not too costly. Well, there's a company called, and I hope I'm not going off on this. Can I mention a company?
Yeah, sure.
The company is called ACX, and acx.com is their website. So I went to their website and looked into it, and it turns out that there are several ways of doing this, one of which is a royalty share. which means that you and the narrator that you hire you share the royalties from the audiobook. Of course, ACX takes a cut too, which is natural.
Do you get a chance to interview or test the
Oh,
narrator,
yes.
the actor?
Oh, yes. And I had several people who asked to be listened to, and I did. The one I picked for this book is an actor. I won't give you his name because I can't remember it right offhand. But he was just absolutely wonderful. And as soon as I heard his sample, which you get, as soon as I heard his sample, I thought, this guy is good. I think he's going to be the one I want. And I have a friend who had him. Actually, he suggested him to me. Had him for one of his books, and he raved about how good he was. And I think. His name is Doug McKechnie, by the way. It just came back to me, and Doug was really good as a narrator.
So you can get that audio book through Amazon.
Yes.
Only, probably. At this
Well, you
point.
can get it through Audible,
Audible.com.
Audible.com, but it's a part of the Amazon network.
Okay, good. And of course, the book is available in paperback. Local marketing. I happen to know that this book is in 8 Cousins, and it's also in the Sandwich Arts Alliance bookshelf of local authors. So you have done some local marketing.
Well, I have, yeah, and I must say that the COVID has really inhibited doing multiple marketing. I also place it at Titcomb's Books shop out in Barnstable, and they have all been very, very helpful in doing this. But if you don't have a chance to go out and face-to-face get groups of people in in rooms and talk to them and get a chance to tell them about these, the interest is kind of not as great as it would be. And I found that Facebook, which a lot of people use for their promotion of their books, I found that not to be very helpful to me. I have another platform called LinkedIn. It's another social media thing, mostly for business and professional people who want to have relationships outside of Facebook. And I think these are good outlets. It's hard to tell where your sales come from.
Well, I think your writing is giving you some satisfaction, and the readers that I know of, including some wonderful quotes in the book and online, are enjoying your books. So what's next? Are you thinking about another book?
Well, I'm actually writing another book, but it's completely different from this one or any of the other two. It's a fictional account of a 20th century man who goes through World War I and then has a family, and he was denied any kind of educational experience because his father died at the age when he was 13, and so he had to quit school and go to work. And this was in the early 1900s, when this was the only thing you did when you didn't have any money to support the family. He had to help support the family. So this is sort of a story of his life, a fictionalized story of his life. It was something I just wanted to do. It was
based
different.
On your father?
Loosely, very loosely, because I've taken some things from his life, but I've taken a lot of liberties also.
Oh, of course. Well, you and I talked about one of my most favorite subjects is where do you get the courage to write? How do you come up with the courage to actually put it on paper? This is what my character thought, or would have thought, or might have thought, or should have thought.
Well, you know, since you brought it up, I didn't think of myself as being courageous. In retrospect, it took a lot of courage to do this, because you're putting yourself out there for people to judge and your writing skills, your character development, your storyline. All of these things are subject to criticism, and I consider myself still in process. I think I have a lot to learn about writing, and I hope that most authors feel that way, because I think you begin to understand how it all comes together and how it should come together.
Well, I hope that people who are aspiring will follow your path. Come to the Cape Cod Writers Center, get involved, come to seminars, go to the conference. I talked to Nancy Rubin Stewart, who's an old pro. She's the executive director and she said it's a craft. Of course, it's more than a craft, but it is a craft that can be learned, and the inspiration and the courage I don't think you can get from anywhere, but the craft you can get from courses and work.
And most people who write read as well, and if you stop reading, I think that you lose a great door to improving your writing. We had a session with Writers Night Out not too long ago, and the person who was doing that sent me a book that he had written about learning from the masters.
Okay.
And he has all of these different great authors, and he takes each one of them and talks about how you can gain something from them.
Learning from the Masters is the title, and
yes.
You have the author's name?
Not off the top of my head.
Okay, well, maybe we'll get the title and put it in the credits. I want to thank you. It's been delightful seeing you and talking with you about this, and we're out of time, and I'm so glad we had a chance.
Thank you, too, for having me.
You're welcome. Thank you for coming on to Books in the World.